This week on Q&A, our guest is Thomas Sowell, Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution.
Thomas Sowell, you said in an interview with American Enterprise Institute some time ago, after quoting Eric Hoffer as saying, intellectuals cannot operate at room temperature. You said, there always has to be a crisis, some terrible reason why their superior wisdom and virtue must be imposed on the unthinking masses.
Yes. You can go back over the last 100 years. You can go back to eugenics in the early part of the 20th century. You can go back to Keynesian economics. You can come forward to the environmental movement. There always is something which requires them to substitute their wisdom and virtue for our lack of understanding.
Aren't you an intellectual?
Oh, I suppose I've been accused of so many things. There's no, I don't say all intellectuals.
What is an intellectual?
I guess the best definition I've heard is from Hayek. He says it's a second-hand dealer in ideas. That the vast majority of intellectuals don't really originate any ideas, but they peddle ideas that other people have originated. And that gives them a great deal of freedom because ideas are so malleable, words are so malleable. Reality is not malleable. And so they can believe in all sorts of things which have no realistic possibility and which have failed time and again in history. But because they know how to rephrase it and repackage it, they can just keep right on going.
If I read correctly, you're going to be 75 this year.
Yes.
How many years have you been thinking and writing?
Oh gosh, I've been published since 1960.
Has it changed at all, the way you learn?
Gosh, not really. I mean, I learned both from reading and from experience. And of course, what I believe has changed radically since I was a Marxist in my 20s. I'm surprised, though, when I go back, because I keep old letters and things, I'm surprised how many of the values I had are still the same values. It's just that now I see that they have to be reached by an entirely different method.
What method?
Well, at one time, for example, I thought that if the government took control of various things, they could do a lot, particularly for people who are poor, less fortunate one way or another. Over time, I've learned that that really does not work. I mean, it sounds better, it doesn't work. Just recently, I came across one number which should have destroyed the whole notion of central planning. And it was that there were 24 million prices in the Soviet Union. Now, there's no human being capable of setting 24 million prices properly, especially when you realize that each price has to be set properly in relation to the other 24 million prices. So you can't even break it down and have, say, 24,000 people, each one with 1,000 prices, because the point is they all have to mesh relative to one another. But if you have a country of a couple of 100 million people, and each person keeps track of only a relatively few prices that affect that person, then it can work.
We're at the Hoover Institution. What is it?
Hoover Institution is a think tank. Established originally just as an archive for all the tons of material that Herbert Hoover collected when he was traveling around Europe after the First World War, during a time of starvation, where he set up this program to feed millions of people across Europe. And when he came back, he dumped all this stuff here at Stanford and set up this archive. And then at some point, Glenn Campbell, one of the directors, decided to turn it into a think tank, and he put it on the map as that.
How long have you been here?
It'll be 25 years in September.
What's life like here for you?
In a sense, I shouldn't even be answering that because I am here so seldom. I work at home miles away, but that's part of the great part of the freedom of the place. I mean, right now, if you ask the director of the Hoover Institution, what is Tom Sowell working on? He'd say, darned if I know. You know, from time to time, they find out what I'm working on, and if they like it, I continue to stay on. I suppose if they went a couple of years and I did nothing, they'd say, why is he here? But it's really a wonderful place, and I've had the most productive years of my life here.
Has your relationship with your readers changed much?
Not that I can think of. Most of the stuff I get from readers is really very positive, very reinforcing. Some of it's very touching. Occasionally you'll get a barrage of criticism on something. I had one recently where there's some internet website that is sicking them on me because I said there's no such thing as a trickle-down theory. Nobody has ever advocated it. And there were all storms of email came in, not one of which contained one quote from one person who had actually advocated it. It's one of those things that someone says that he objects to in someone else, but we can never find the someone else who's supposed to have said it.
In reading a little bit of your personal autobiography, there was a scene where you were on top of the World Trade Center a number of years ago.
Oh, yes.
Having a dinner. Do you think about that often in light of 9/11?
Oh, that's chilling. It's chilling, yeah. I was having dinner with a man that I had worked for decades earlier in a machine shop in New York. It's really the low point of my life. And I didn't have enough money to ride the New York subway, which was 5 cents in those days. And so I would walk from the Brooklyn Bridge up to Harlem because I didn't have the subway fare. And when I got paid, they held back a couple of days, which normally doesn't mean anything, but when you're in that position, it means a lot. And so I had to ask him to borrow some money so I had something to eat with. And he lent me $5, which was real money in those days. And so when I came back there, and I was looking out of the hotel window that I was in, and I looked over to where I used to work, and I thought about him, and I phoned him. And he brought his family, and we ate dinner at the top of the World Trade Center. And it was really one of the best evenings of my life. And he and I were both on the verge of tears when we parted. It was just a wonderful time.
A number of years later, of course, 9/11. What's
Yes.
the impact of 9/11 on this country and the world?
Oh my gosh, we will never be the same again. I'm disappointed in people who seem not to realize that it's not business as usual anymore. That it's really, there are things we have to do that we don't want to do, but the alternative is far worse. And so the world will never be the same. I hope that it wakes up some people. It certainly hasn't awakened all of them.
What should change in this country even more than it has?
I think there shouldn't be these irresponsible statements that are made about the world situation. Things like, we're having a backdoor draft, things to undermine the troops who are out there. I'm appalled that the troops in battle with their lives on the line are being tried now as criminals for actions that they took when they had to make a split-second decision with their life at stake. And when I think of all the excuses that are made for common criminals, he had an unhappy childhood, he ate Twinkies, whatever, and these men are out there fighting, putting their lives on the line for us, and we're sitting back here second guessing.
Why? What's causing the second guessing?
For some people it's politics, but for other people it is just sheer unthinking reaction. Gee, you shouldn't have done this or you shouldn't have done that. It's like the people who second guess the police when there's a shooting and they say, why did the police fire so many shots? Now, I taught pistol shooting in the Marine Corps. I'm not the least bit surprised that they fired all those shots and so many of them missed. That's what happens with pistols. But to think that someone who has never had a gun in his hand is criticizing someone for what he did and is sitting back in air-conditioned comfort someplace, second-guessing this guy who had his life on the line and who put his life on the line to protect him.
What kind of marks would you give President Bush?
High marks.
For what?
For thinking long-term. I mean, take one example of Social Security. Whatever you think about his particular plan and his arguments you can make back and forth, the fact is he knows Social Security is not going to run out of money while he's president. The easiest thing in the world would be for him to say, forget it, it is someone else's problem somewhere down the road. But he understands that the longer we wait, the worse it's going to get, and therefore we ought to take it on. I think the same thing with terrorism. He could have stopped in Afghanistan, he could have done this, he could have done that. But the fact is he realized that the fact that we stopped doesn't mean that they're going to stop.
Irving Kristol told you a couple years ago, or a lot of years ago, that the worst thing about running for office is that you might get elected.
Oh, absolutely, and he was absolutely right.
How much did you think about running?
I thought about it only until I talked with the first professionals. I mean, Senator Hayakawa wanted me to run for the Senate in California. And out of respect for him, I agreed. I thought it never crossed my mind before or since. But out of respect for him, I talked to political professionals. And these people would talk to me about 2 minutes, and they would say, you're not what politicians are made of. My late sister, who probably knew me better than anyone in the world, said, Tommy, I can't even imagine you in politics. Can't even imagine. And once, while my wife was telling a friend, Tom wouldn't last 20 minutes in Washington, and he said, oh, yes, he would. No, I'm not saying he'd last an hour,
Why?
Because I say what I mean, and that doesn't help you a lot in politics. They tried to get me to become a Secretary of Labor when Reagan came. There were people who were pushing that, and I told the guy, stop pushing it, I said, the President of the United States has better things to do than having to run around all the time saying, well, what Tom really meant was, after I make some statement.
What kind of person then goes into politics?
I don't really know. I just don't know. It has to be someone who's either enormously dedicated or who is enormously concerned with power, prominence, and those kinds of things.
Talk about saying what you think. I just picked this up. How often do you do the random thoughts columns?
Well, I collect them over a period of time. When I have enough for a column, I publish it.
Not too many days ago, you wrote the following. Teresa Heinz Kerry's latest loony statement that pro-Bush hackers could have gotten into the electronic voting machines during last year's election gave me my first misgivings about having criticized her. She may not be playing with a full deck.
Yes. I just can't imagine. This is one of a whole series of things she said that makes you wonder. At first, I simply criticized, and then I wondered, my gosh, maybe she really doesn't have it all.
How far can you go in today's column writing business when you're writing about people like this, the wife of a candidate?
I don't know. I really don't give it a lot of thought.
You say what you want to say?
Yeah.
Editors ever correct you?
Oh, when I have something factually wrong, yes. I mean, I even printed a factual correction last year for the first time. But that's really not a big problem.
For the first time?
Yes.
Ever?
Yeah.
Factual correction?
Yeah.
What was it?
I had quoted some organization as having lamented poaching in Kenya. And they hadn't lamented poaching in Kenya, but I thought lamenting poaching is surely not liable. But they wanted to make an issue of it. They didn't, and they were right on that one point, being wrong on everything else. I sent that correction in.
When we last talked on Book Notes in 1990,
Mm-hmm.
you had written something like 14 books, and in the interim period, you've almost written that many again.
Probably. I haven't kept track.
It's over 30.
Really?
How do you go about, and I know you got another one coming out in a few days,
Mm-hmm.
how do you go about staying on a schedule and writing as many books as you have?
Actually, I don't stay on a schedule. I write when I have something to say. And that can be, for example, the book Basic Economics that I wrote, that took shape over a period of a decade. I wasn't even sure it would ever be finished. But as I would see things written that on TV that were actually just so wrong economically, I would then sit down and write something explaining this thing in plain language. And over the years, the stuff would just collect in the computer. And after half a dozen or so years, I began to see, we have almost enough here for a book. And then I began to organize it and turn it into a book. So I only write, and so I normally will have 2 or 3 things going at one time. I have no idea which one will ever get finished at all, because there's some that will never get finished, and much less which one's going to come out first. So right now, for example, I have one book coming out in a few weeks that you mentioned. I have another one in press with Yale University Press on a totally different subject, essays on classical economics.
What's a day like then for you?
I have great freedom, since I don't have classes to teach. I don't have any things any people to meet. If on a given day I may do a lot, or I may do nothing at all. I mean, I can remember once I was sitting here and I said, I haven't been to Yosemite in a while. I just got up to the car and got in the car and drove to Yosemite and stayed the rest of the week.
But how many columns a week do you have to write?
I'm only, my contract calls for 1 a week. I usually write more than 1. I don't get paid any more for the extra ones. If I'm truly, frothing at the mouth, I'll write maybe 3 or 4.
How long does it take you to write a 750-word column?
Again, it's hard to say, because I have a whole bunch of them that are half-written, and again, that will probably never be completely written. And sometimes something will happen in the news that will just jog me, and I'll sit down and do it in a couple of hours. Another time, it'll just take, the random thoughts column can last, it could be a couple of months before I collect enough for one of those. So it's just very fluid.
One of the things that's changed, a big change since we last talked, is the internet. And I noticed that on townhall.com, You can read every Thomas Sowell column since 2000.
Yes.
What impact does that have on you? How does that change, again, the relationship with you and your readers?
Not that I know of.
Do more people read you now than they used to?
I'm in more papers than I was, say, 10 years ago.
But what about the internet? Do you get, how much feedback do you get?
Oh, lots of feedback from the internet. Lots of feedback from the internet.
How would you say the internet traffic relates to the newspaper reading traffic? Do you get any sense?
It's hard to know. Sometimes they'll just write me about a particular column and they won't say where they read it. So I have no idea where they got it from the internet or from the newspaper. But in terms of mail, certainly the emails vastly exceed the postal mail that I get.
How many emails do you get on an ongoing basis, and do you answer them?
Hundreds a week, and I can't answer them all. I'm just really sorry that I can't, because some of them really deserve an answer. If I can do 10% of them, I consider I've had a good day.
How many do you read?
I read most of them. Sometimes some of these people write in and they'll say something in the first paragraph that makes you realize this, this is not worth going any further with, and you just hit the delete button and keep moving.
What's your impression of the internet and its impact on the society?
Oh, I think it's opened up a lot of things. It's made it harder, I guess, for a totalitarian country to seal its people off from the outside world, and that can only be a good thing.
You wrote in one of your Random Thoughts columns, one sign of the Democrats' desperation is that some of them continue to try to tar the Bush administration with innuendos of racism, even though its cabinet members have included people of Hispanic, Japanese, American, Jewish, and Chinese American ancestry, as well as 2 conservative black secretaries of state.
2 consecutive.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yes. Well, it does seem a little ridiculous, but it also shows how desperate they are. The Democrats get something like 80 to 90% of the black vote. If that ever falls down to 60 or 70%, they're in deep trouble, because they've alienated so many other people that they have a hard time winning elections at all. And so therefore they must try to keep blacks paranoid. I think of this thing about, remember the dragging death in Texas some years ago, and they used that against Bush, because Bush was against hate crimes legislation. And the fact is that these 2 guys who did this were electrocuted. So whether it was a hate crime or not a hate crime, they're dead. And calling it a hate crime would have changed absolutely nothing. What it would have done was open up the courts to all kinds of litigation, because the guy is convicted of a hate crime and his lawyer would say, well, it really wasn't really a hate crime, and they can go through the whole Circuit Court of Appeals and so forth. And so to me, I agree entirely with Bush on this particular point, that doesn't matter what your motivation was. If you did it, you should pay the price.
Why do so many blacks follow the Democratic Party then?
Inertia. Don't forget the Solid South party that followed the Democratic Party for over a century. So blacks have been into this, 60-some years now. I'm hoping that blacks will wake up faster than the Solid South did. But these things go, the Jewish vote has gone Democratic by overwhelming majority, and it's hard to see why, given the policies and so on. But once this inertia gets going, it'll keep going for a long time.
You were a Democrat in 1972, and
Yeah.
you say you haven't been a member of a party since then.
That's right.
Why? Why'd you switch to no party?
Oh, McGovern. When I saw what happened to the Democrats under McGovern, I voted, heaven help us, for McGovern in the primaries in 1972 simply because I was so sick of the Vietnam War. But the more I saw of McGovern and the people around McGovern, the more I realized what a disaster it would be to have this man president. I was never a Nixon fan, and so in 1972 I didn't vote at all. Or in 76 for that matter.
How does Richard Nixon look now in retrospect?
A lot better.
Why?
Well, you compare him with, say, Clinton. Nixon was going to, was threatened with impeachment. He quit. He spared the country. He wasn't going to fight it. Even more so if you go back to 1960, when there was an extremely close race between Nixon and, 60? Yes, Nixon and Kennedy. And there were people saying, there was all kinds of voter fraud in Chicago. I mean, voter fraud in Chicago is not a new idea. And they were saying he should challenge it. He refused to challenge it. The country should not be put through that. The stuff that went on in Florida in 2000, that kind of stuff. He spared us all of that.
What was your feeling about Jerry Ford?
I like President Ford. I think Ronald Reagan was better. But the thing that I guess the one thing that really made me upset with President Ford was pardoning Richard Nixon. I was driving my car on the highway when I heard the news, and I immediately got off the highway because I don't like to drive when I'm angry. And until I calmed down and went again, because of course what it said was there are people out there who don't, who are essentially above the law. I think that is the worst thing you can do. Yes, the country would have. I don't know how much the country would have been put through an impeachment of Nixon, because he didn't have that many fans at that point. But the idea that some people can commit these crimes, because I suspect that had Nixon been convicted and served a little jail time, I suspect that Clinton might have watched this step a lot more carefully.
Which president offered you the Federal Trade Commissioner's job?
President Ford.
What were the circumstances?
They had a vacancy. It was 1976, and they offered it to me, and I agreed to take it on condition that if there's any opposition that arises, they let me know. I'll withdraw because I don't have time to play Washington games. And I kept calling there and asking the guy at the White House who's handling this, is there any? I don't hear anything. What's going on? And he said, "Oh no, it's just taking time." And eventually, I was in Washington, so I went up to the Hill and talked to the staffer of this committee that handled this. And he said, "We've gone over your record with a fine-tooth comb. We can find nothing to object to, and therefore we're just not going to hold hearings. Because this is an election year, we expect our guy is going to be elected, and he'll appoint his own man." What burned me was that he said, and I said, "Did you tell the White House this?" He said, "We told the White House this months ago." And I went back to the guy at the White House, and I said, "I just talked to this fellow on the Hill, and either he's lying or you're lying. Which is it?" And he started hemming and hawing, and I turned and walked out. I sent them a one-line withdrawal letter from the hotel on hotel stationery, and that was the end of it.
Are you sad you never served in government?
No. My gosh, no.
Why?
Stuff like this is one reason. That, Harry Truman said, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. And anyone who's asked my opinion about going to Washington and serving in government, I can't think of anyone I said that they should do it. Some people have credited me with having some influence with Clarence Thomas. I obviously don't, because I told him when he was at the EEOC and he was looking around what he's going to do next, I said, get out of Washington and stay out of Washington. So he wouldn't even be where it is if he listened to me.
What are your expectations about the possibility of him being nominated to be Chief Justice?
No idea. I mean, I know less about Washington